to begin. And first of all, thank you for joining us today. It's a real pleasure to have this opportunity to share this work. Just before we begin, I just wanted to, I'll probably revisit this in the end, but there are many people who are involved in this work. So as I move through this, I want to kind of remember that. I want you all to remember that. There are many different individuals who have contributed to the work, but also have contributed to thinking this through. And this was an emergent initiative that took place in the project. So I think that's an important piece to remember. This is a very large project in itself, and this particular initiative is working with narratives of the work has its own particular story, which is really my purpose today, is to share that story. So there are many, many characters in that story. So that, I guess, is my point. So like any good story, I would like to begin with sharing a part of a story. You can look at it on your screen to help you along if you choose to, or you can, close your eyes or do what you wish. But I want to have the ability to share with you a few lines from one of the particular narratives. This person is particularly from North Carolina, and we'll leave it at that. So I think that this project really shows that this work has to be benefiting all of the key players. The store owner has to be making money off of it. It has to be at a price that the people are willing and able to pay for it. And then it needs to be reliable. I think food system work is very segregated. Like, we're doing it for obesity, and we're doing it for farmers' rights. And then, well, we're doing it for animal rights. It's like, no, we're all doing the same thing. If we could just find some common language and start breaking down some of those barriers. Like, who doesn't want healthy corner store options that the owner is making money off of? The more money she makes, the more taxes she has to pay, and the more we get that money back. So it's like every single avenue. The more healthy food she sells, the more healthy food she can buy. The more healthy food she can buy, the more farmers get to produce them. It's like there's a whole cycle of people who are being affected. But because we often only think of, you only care about it being low calorie, or you only care about it being local, and you only care about whatever. We're all working towards the same thing. Our partners can really look like anything as long as that common goal is shared. So I'd like to use that as an introduction of sorts to the work of the Appalachian Foodshed Project. As Nikki had already stated, that we are trying to address many issues that inform and also are coming out of the issues around community food security in all of West Virginia and our Western North Carolina and Southwest Virginia regions. And the work is multi-armed and has a lot of elements that connect to one another. But I think the reason why I'm highlighting some of these words is to really reflect on the need to enhance our work that's already currently present. It's really present in our region. And the idea to create this network has really strongly emerged. And as we are now reaching our 5-year mark of this USDA-funded project, that is really where we're holding space. And I think that's language that we hear from many of our partners, as well as the folks who are actively involved with this networking process. And we have many, many partnerships that reflect lots of the different kinds of work that we're doing, and emphasizing, most importantly, I think, this complexity. I think many of us who are involved in food system and agricultural development work realize that work is, it's complex, but to really feel that complexity and to strategize around it and in it means something else, particularly in our area where we have many different politics of rurality and politics of historical Appalachia. And we are living and working in issues surrounding, resource extraction, socio-political isolation, strong heritage around farming and cultural independence, and well as issues of hunger and food insecurity, and many different calls for social justice that influence the complexity in itself. So I want to just honor that work, and that's what I think the Story Project was really about. So just want to recognize that we started this project as a whole, emphasizing community food security, and this common definition that Hammond Bellows has offered us several years ago has been a real good anchor for us. But however, like the narrative project, we have really worked with our partnerships to define what we mean by community food security. And so I didn't share that definition because it's not necessarily that significant other than to know that we can and have the ability to question and critique what we mean by having a safe, a culturally acceptable, and nutritionally adequate diet that maximizes community self-reliance and social justice. So what does that mean for us? What are we going to do about that? And so again, this has a body of work that really puts this definition in question. Another framework that we want to acknowledge is the whole measures for community food systems. This has been a really important framework for us, not just to understand how people are doing their food system work, but how do we as partners in the work actually begin to think about mobilizing and strategizing and assessing what does the complexity look like, and what are the gaps, and do we have a whole food system? And so these fields and practices are just a quick snapshot for you to look at and to think about if you already haven't been, if you're not already familiar with the whole measures. And I will refer to this again in a little bit as we think about some of the narratives. So that is a great interlude to talking about the stories of community food work in Appalachia. I think what's really important to talk about now is to recognize that this project was not written into our USDA AFRI grant that funded our work as a whole. This actually emerged out of conversation with our partners, particularly in Virginia. It really launched in a Virginia conversation, but it was really much reflected in Western North Carolina and West Virginia in the same right, but the conversation really explicitly was had that we just want to know what each other is doing. What kind of work are you doing that's addressing food system change? What does food security work look like? How can we better understand that? We feel like we are politically isolated and also geographically isolated. How do we better, quote, craft and weave our work together so we can have better strategic action? And again, this work people are doing great work in the region. We're not necessarily trying to put new projects out there, which we have, and that's important. But I think it's so significant to recognize that there is a lot of amazing people doing hard work, and where are they and how are they doing it? What can we learn from that? So that was really the conversation, and that essentially launched an action research initiative that was able to be facilitated starting in Virginia. I was able to work with some community partners who were interested in tying this to a current opportunity, which is also an Appalachian Foodshed Project curriculum piece, which was designing a class titled Food Security and Resilient Communities. And the course was actually an offering from Virginia Tech. I led the class in spring 2013 and 2015, and we also were able to really work with our Virginia Tech Appalachian Foodshed Project team with our partnerships in the community, Southwest Virginia. And they were able to, we'll get to this in a little bit, but really play a pretty significant role in pushing the work forward here and helping design what kind of stories would be told. So using our different skill sets and using the space of the course and using the Appalachian Foodshed Project as the springboard, this project really came to life. And really the point was to share, to create first, of course, but to share these stories or narratives that illustrate the lived experiences of different types of stakeholders, activists, educators, farmers, practitioners who are involved in different organizations and community-based groups that are working towards food system change in our region. So it wasn't just people interested in Virginia connecting, it was people in Virginia connecting to others in West Virginia and North Carolina. So, and back again. So I think that was, we started in Virginia. So that was our initial impetus. From perhaps a little bit of an academic side of things, which I think is very practical in its performance, is that we've tried to not necessarily just use community food security as our frame in the narrative itself. This came to light through some work, actually, graduate students who were really interested in trying to explore an inclusive meaning around food system change and how are people doing the work. What does the work look like? How can we embrace this interconnectedness of the work? That was clearly happening in our region, so we needed to think about a way to frame that so we could, both hang our hats a little bit on it, but also continue to challenge what it means to have interconnected processes and domains of work. And so Rachel Slocum's work has really been helpful for us to think that through, and I encourage you to think about that. She's very much explicitly asking us to question the role of justice in food work, and I think that was very explicitly important to us as well. And obviously the partners is part of that. So these are 4 kind of domains and processes that we can think about: farm sustainability, nutrition education, environmental sustainability, and social justice work. And of course, these are not necessarily separate buckets, but sometimes individuals might reflect on the work in a certain way that puts them more strongly fixed in one bucket or another. And then others who are really interconnected in much more, complex ways due to the type of organization that they work for, the kind of activism that they're trying to promote. It just highlights different ways in which the work gets done, which I think has been really important for us because some of our colleagues, particularly in West Virginia, have really showed the interconnections between things like the alternative food movement with the emergency food system, and how does community food work, what does that look like when you have those intersections, and how are we actually trying to strategize those movements together in very complicated ways. So the question maybe you've asked is why narratives, and why do this work in any kind of way? And I think it's important to ask the question because all of our work should have some rationale behind it. And for some individuals, I think this has been a conversation for some time, but to kind of put some pen to paper here, food security, I think we all agree, it's a wicked problem, it's a profound issue. Some argue that it can't be solved with uniform solutions or technical answers. We need technical issues to address. We need to think about how best practices can be put into play, but that's not necessarily going to solve the problem. But rather, we need to think about the ways in which systems and spaces are created and how that integration and coordination and experimentation of work are actually geared towards new ideas, the emergence of new ideas, and the emergence of new possibilities in our communities. So it takes us a little bit beyond the technical notions of what knowledge looks like, but focuses on perhaps different ways of knowing and different ways of experience. Another way to put it is when we face a complex issue like food insecurity, seeing the system better means reading a multiplicity of realities and generating new ways to engage with them. So that might help us encourage the weaving together of our stories, our personal experiences, and those strategies exactly of community food work. So what does the stories look like? How are people doing the work? Which hopefully lends to a larger regional understanding and a collective action for community food security. And I personally think this last point is maybe the most important, is to help humanize or create empathy around the issues of our wicked problems in our food system. Because once we have empathy and once we humanize what's happening, we hopefully can have more space and more spaces in our hearts and our minds to create those new possibilities that are needed. So to move that forward, we use the approach that can be kind of put into the camp of narrative inquiry, which in itself is a pretty extensive methodological approach. There's many different ways in which people do narrative work. I'm not trained in performance work. I'm not trained in the arts. I'm a community development person. I'm faculty in the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences. So I think that's important to remember, that we can think about narrative work in many different ways, and we can think about the inquiry around narratives and stories in different ways. And so this is just one way to do that, but I think we're excited to talk about narratives and not in a fixed way. We're excited to talk about narratives as both a process of reflection and reflexivity of our work through the act of storytelling, and then the products of engaging with those everyday knowledges and realities of the community food work itself. So it has a very generative quality. Participants were really active in the initial design of what the narratives were going to be used for and how they would participate in the prompting of a story. We were able to bring folks together to offer questions and kind of edit how they would be able to respond to questions, what really resonated with them, and how a story might look. And we were able to then utilize that as an initial, first step, and we put our process and our protocol through IRB here at Virginia Tech. And then we have an AFP narrative protocol, which we're happy to share with others. And clearly to note that we were able to draw upon other narrative work, and you can see some of the citations below that we were able to really draw upon. And they're not to say that there's clearly some similar relationships to how narrative inquiry can work, but I think all narrative work has a sense of its own performance, and I think that's really important to note. And so the questions and the thoughts behind those questions are kind of rooted on our own cultural need. And so I encourage you to think about, if you look at our protocol, why that need was there and why the impetus really informed some of those prompts and questions in style. So our process included, about a 2-hour semi-structured, if you will, an interview. It wasn't necessarily an interview per se, but there were some prompts that were offered, and we tried to stay out of the way, letting the story be told by itself, and perhaps allowing people to be prompted in ways when, you felt something. And I think one of our colleagues says that really well. Like when you really feel the effect of a story, you want to encourage it to continue. And you should be asking yourself, why am I feeling this? Why am I thinking this? If you're getting that sensation, then you want to hopefully use your prompts to continue that line of inquiry. And so we work together as a team to hopefully think about the role of affect in the story process itself. We transcribed line by line, edited, and when I mean edited, it's a very complex project of kind of approach, not editing for, quote, removing language, but it's more in terms of keeping things nice and tidy. It's more about editing to allow the words in the story to really jump off the page. Taking your spoken voice into a written voice is both a challenge and an opportunity to be able to read and engage with. And so that takes multiple eyes, takes multiple readings, and it takes multiple people to be able to respond to that. And that includes the storyteller themselves. So there was a lot of editing that took place, and there probably can be a continued editing. We don't see these as fixed. We actually want to encourage people to respond to them and perhaps continue to write from them. And we've talked about ways we can do that, which perhaps we'll get to in the end. And so there is this act of reading, and quote, I have analyzed in quotations, and there's a reason for that. And yes, we can analyze for their meaning in a fixed way. We also can read them for how they make us think about the issues, and not necessarily from a deductive process. And so I'll get to that in a little bit, but there's definitely a play on both sides of this binary, which we're hoping to then maybe challenge at the end of the day. Of course, these were vetted for public sharing and reading by the storytellers and the interviewers, and we have IRB protocol, which helped make those identities public, and we really do thank all of the contributors for that in itself. So this is a little bit of a process which I think this is ideal in that we put this together in the protocol. I would argue that this is probably not necessarily what happened in the process itself, but I think it's helpful to know that there was interest by the participants, the storytellers, to not just talk about their work, it's about where they come from and what kind of knowledges do they use to understand their work and what kind of realities are they're embedded in and perhaps working through. What I mean by that, people are coming into this community food work in our region in multiple different ways, and they're not necessarily, our paths are very curly and sometimes crooked, and sometimes they're met with pain and sometimes they're met with a lot of joy. And we need to acknowledge that and make space for that as we talk about our stories. And so we wanted to talk about past experiences, and we had some prompts about that, which is much more open-ended, and we weren't necessarily concerned about where that led, other than letting the storyteller kind of situate themselves and hopefully recognize that there were knowledges that they had to offer and those realities that went with it that are important to itself bring to light. That often then led to a conversation around the work that they do now and trying to kind of focus it around a particular type of project that they wanted to talk about. And often that would lead to other project work and kind of interwoven with very, very specific community activity that was being had. And so we try to kind of dig into that, kind of dig into their experience of the work. And it was less them to pick something that was meaningful to them. And not to question that meaning to analyze it for right or wrong, but to analyze it, and I'm sorry, to kind of appreciate it for, I think, the purposes of their work. If it's transformation, if it's to share knowledge, if it's to perhaps combat something, some injustice, why was that meaningful to them? So again, it's not just what they're doing, but sort of the significance of why they do their work. And then we often ask questions around, well, this region wants to create a larger sense of understanding and connectivity. What do you hope to see happen if that can take place, and how would you connect to that? What would be your aspiration for that work, both here locally as well as a regional strategy? So we kind of talked about sort of theory of change and opportunities to do that work in the future. So that's kind of our process, and I think the stories were all very different, and yet we could talk about why there's some reading for sameness. But I'll get to that just a second. Just to recognize what we have, we did work with about 36 different individuals, and we have across 3 states, and we have we have published 16 of them on our website, and we're working to clearly put more up there. We wanted to start with some now and continue to trickle those in over the next few months. We also want to recognize Phil Diadamo-Damery's dissertation, which you see the title here. I love the title, Ontological Possibilities, Rhizonalic Explorations of Community Food Work in Central Appalachia, which is different methodological and ontological orientation to narrative work, but his piece is truly connected and helped us think about narratives in a perhaps different, more fractured way, which I think really helps in thinking about affect in moving the work forward. So really quickly, I know I'm probably a little bit short on time because I love to talk about this work, but we'll have some time for some conversations if you want to know more. I wanted to just highlight, however, that the narratives themselves, as we mentioned, there's a role to read them for both the sameness, like reading the lines, reading the words for what can we understand that we have in common, and what kind of experiences and practices and strategies are present? What can we read to make meaning from that we can have some kind of thing to hold on to, something that's a little bit more fixed? And that's really important. Now it's really the impetus by the practitioners themselves in the very beginning, as I mentioned. However, there's also a role for reading narratives in a way that brings on these instances of affect and curiosity and what some refer to as the ontological unsettling. And this is often related to Phil's work, and it really has influenced the project, the narrative project as a whole, because I think we think about our work as a generative process. We mentioned narratives are both process and product, but this role of creating imagination and dialogue around how to work in complexity, not just in it, but through it. And that takes a different type of reading of the work. It takes a different relationship, takes on a different relationship to understanding how we work together. And so we want to encourage you to think about the narratives that we've created both in this way, not just for the way we can read it for sameness, but also how it makes us think about new ideas, new possibility, and more of a movement. It's an active sense of reading and engaging with one another. So I just wanted to highlight that. I think that's really important as we move forward. So, but however, to think about some of the work that how can we read this work for sameness? What can we learn from it in terms of these experiences that people can really respond to in a kind of a material way? I think there's so much work that's being done, and so this is just a snapshot of the types of community food work. If you remember back a couple of slides, how are people doing their work? How would they define their work? And so this probably reflects a lot of the work that you all do as well, and that in itself reflects some of the complexity around how do we work together with youth development and youth advocacy and justice with issues around food pantries and farmers market development, food councils, healthy corner stores, senior citizen advocacy, rural and economic development. These are the partners who are at the table. And so this is really significant to think about the ways in which we have impact. And so looking at the whole measures again, we see that probably the first three, a lot of synergy around vibrant farms, the need for and work towards healthy people, healthy communities, nutrition, health work, and a real strong emphasis, of course, on thriving local economy. And we clearly do see the work around, strong communities, fairness and justice, and sustainable ecosystems. But I think as we move forward, we want to know how people are doing their work, where are they gravitating to, and how can we then continue to challenge that work? How can we continue by meaning, how do we connect it to more of the experiences of community food work in the region? Because we are working in complexity, and that means we need to think about the processes and the spaces for work. And the narratives also have taught us the ways in which people are partnering, the significance of networking and how it's difficult and yet so needed, why we need facilitation and catalyzing to make networking happen, both on the ground as well as across our networks in different types of ways. The significance of capacity building in our local communities as well as connecting across the region. The importance of having shared and just decision-making as we work towards strategies that both are locally defined as well as regionally connected. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the narratives talk to us about how funding or resource leveraging is part of that strategy, and it's difficult. And it's not straightforward, and sometimes we are directly facing injustice when it comes to who gets funding and who doesn't. And of course, all of the different partnerships of people who have been contributing to the narratives, everything from our grassroots activists to governmental decision makers, farmers, extension, corporate extension, and university faculty, and many different nonprofit and faith-based organizations in small and larger scale. So again, the complexity of space and the complexity of place. Really briefly, as we work towards our larger AFP reporting, we're thinking about strategies for change and community transformation. And one way the narratives can help us think about that is how people are then doing that work. How are they working in complexity? And some of the social movement work that that's out there, particularly a couple years ago, I think some of you might be familiar with the work of Stevenson, Ruth, and Lisberg and Clancy around warrior, builder, and weaver work. And I think this has helped us see the ways in which people aren't necessarily putting their work specifically in these areas, but the necessity of how these strategies need to be stretched across our region and in our local communities. So I'll just kind of leave it at that particular point. The last few slides here, I just want to emphasize that this is just a quick snapshot. This is sort of an abstract, if you will, a summary. The practitioners themselves were able to help pen their summaries and edit them. Elizabeth Feldman, she's a great, hardworking, inspiring practitioner in West Virginia, the executive director of the West Virginia Food and Farm Coalition. And her narrative, I just wanted to bring up two of them, one of them being Elizabeth. She really talks about her work in ways that, as you can see, some keywords that she pulled out, as well as other readers around aggregation and distribution, but food sovereignty, how we need to think about hubbing and local food economy, but justice is clearly infused in her work, and so how does that look? And so just a quick snap of that. I just wanted to, this is what the narratives look like in a PDF form. When you go to our website, you'll see the interviewer, how they're edited, and they're about 20 pages long. They're not short, and they're not designed for you necessarily to read them line by line if you choose not to. They're designed for, or if you choose to engulf in all of it. It's really your choice. We just want you to be able to have an opportunity to hear the voices that are really lending to the voices in the region. So just wanted to give you a really brief snapshot of that. Also is one by Brian Jacks here in Virginia. Brian is the Associate State Director of AARP, working with senior citizens and food councils and working towards alleviating hunger, but seeing how food system organizing for senior citizen advocacy is tied to that need. And his quote, crusade against hunger is a very intriguing one. And I think, again, there's so much to say about them. So I'm going to let you clearly, hopefully, engage with them on your own, but I just want to highlight specifically that their voices are the reason why we're doing this work. And you can find them on the website, which I'll get to in just a second. To kind of going back, Elizabeth and Brian. So yeah, the website here, sorry about that, I need to go back to the website. So this is the site, you can go right to it. We have the link and everyone can have access to the slides afterwards. And of course, I think Nikki already has it posted on the website, on the Appalachian Foodshed Project site, so you can go right there. But this is what we look like now. You can learn more about our methodology, you can learn more about how we define community food work. You can collect right on the different stories here, and then you can also look by keyword, and we have a search function. So if you're interested in a particular state, so if you're interested in a particular person, or if you're interested in a particular issue or illustration of community food work, you can go to the search function and do that. We also have a way for you to leave responses and to comment and perhaps start your own conversation online here in the site. All right, moving ahead. So we have them available by our website as well as PDF. We encourage you to utilize them. We have been using them in our coursework in terms of reading together, and we also have been using them in the community in ways both through our narrative project specifically here, as well as ways in which we've collected narratives in our assessment work. So there's an exchange there. And the role of reading reading the work together has really been pretty impactful. So perhaps many of you are doing that already, and it's something that I know we have interest to do more of. You can also learn more about the narratives through our social media with AFP. I know we had a blog post that was posted recently and some ways in which we're going to be posting more on Facebook to kind of highlight particular narratives just so they get further reach for you all to engage with. We'll also be using the narratives in our analysis or just in the report itself to connect both on the reading for sameness as well as reading for affect. Phil Diadamo-Damer and I have also have a book chapter out on this work, so if you're curious to know more about that work, that chapter will be coming out later this year. In terms of next steps, we have interest by our partners to continue doing the work, and that includes having readings in the community with the narratives that we've created, and ideally creating new narratives and creating new opportunities for those readings, and creating more publications that are designed for the public and publications that are perhaps designed for academic audiences, but hopefully they have exchanges for both. And you know, this is perhaps the products that I think matter pretty significantly. And I guess those are products, we have material pieces you can walk away with and engage with. But the product itself, remember we talked about narratives as both process and product, but I think these narratives most significantly help us build relationships, which is something that we have focused on for many years now here in our region, with a diversity of different stakeholders to understand their experiences of community food work. These products hopefully are helping us create new possibilities to that generative work itself of the telling and the sharing of the work, as well as informing this regional strategy, this regional networking that is reflective of flexible and emergent theories of change, and making necessary space for this dialogue that's needed to humanize, empathize the realities of food insecurity in our food system. I want to end with two brief pieces that are from folks both in North Carolina as well as in Virginia. I'm looking forward to not being so mad about decisions that are made for me instead of with me. I'm excited about that. I really do not want to live in a world where we are more valued, especially these huge populations of people who are suffering from the systems that we've created. You can't put blame on a person who's operating in a system that's holding them down, whether that is ageism or poverty or racism. I'm looking forward to those little things being a little less heavy on everything that we're doing. I mean, we already do value people. We just do it wrong. The wrong people are getting paid the wrong amount of money for the worst things. And not everyone. There are a lot of people out there making good dollars, and they should continue making it. But where do we place value? And to conclude, the other surprising reward is that people continue to give us ideas. I want to thank you for your time today. If you have any questions, you're welcome to contact me. Please visit the Appalachian Foodshed Project website, and please visit the Community Food Work Initiative website to engage with our narratives. And I want to thank all of the storytellers and the interviewers for their work, the graduate students in the Food Security and Resilient Communities course, Becca, Shreya, and Garland here at Virginia Tech for their editorial expertise, insights, and of most importance is their sense of humor in this work. And of course, Phil and Nikki Diadamo-Damer for not only supporting this work, but contributing to the intellectual space that made it possible. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kim. And we have about 20 minutes left for conversation and questions. Right now, I'm going to, in just a second, I'm going to unmute you all. Don't panic. You can remute yourself if you'd like. You can either ask questions via your microphone or your audio connection. or you can use the chat box, which I'll monitor, and if you put questions in the chat box, I'll bring them to Ken's attention. But let's just turn it over and see if you all have any questions or any conversation that might help our dialogue move forward.
Hi.
I don't know where I thought about it.
Well, but he might have, because FCS is the same in golf bearing, he might have a little bit more pull there.
But I mean, to me, it was the natural 4-H. They don't think that way.
Okay, let's retry that. Since there's a lot of background noise, there should be a function for raising your hand. You may be able to unmute yourself, or you can comment through chat. There are also links in the chat box to, those links are also available on the website. So if you go to the Appalachian Foodshed Project.org website, you can get to all of these places, the narratives, webinar links, and eventually this presentation. But in case you want to get to them right now, the narratives are linked in the chat box. So.
Well, I've just kind of taken the opportunity here. If anyone has any questions about how we did our work or what we might do with it next, you're welcome to ask now. If you have any questions you want to pose at a different time, I know sometimes these questions can be, related to your work, and we would want to hear about that. We want to know how this could connect to you in different ways, including your particular community food work. I think we had someone raise their hand. With that, I think Isaac raised his hand.
Yeah.
Oh, great. Hi,
Can you
Isaac.
hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
I
how
can
are you?
hear you. Great.
Yeah, thanks for putting this webinar on. I appreciate the work you're doing. It's good work.
Oh, thank you.
I had a question about your process a little bit. I work at Antioch College, and we do a lot of experiential learning projects similar to yours. I was wondering, were students involved in this project, and if so, in what capacity?
Thank you. Yeah, I didn't go into any depth, so thank you for bringing that up. Yes, so in the Food Security and Resilient Communities course, which is a graduate level class, our students were able to participate. In spring 2013, they were part of the initial launching, working with the practitioners in Virginia to help create a protocol, and they were sort of learning about that process. So they were probably not at those community meetings. Several, Garland I know was, and other people were who were involved with the AFP directly. But where they most put their time and energy was in actually the interviewing. They were able to interview a practitioner, and then they were asked to transcribe that process. And I worked really closely with them because there is IRB. That's really important to acknowledge that people are putting their time and their energy into sharing. And so there was I think a lot of care and consideration that went into that process. So that was essentially one of their major goals in the class. And that was actually an action research course, meaning we designed that class as we went through the semester, and that we voted and we went through a consent process. That became the finals. The students wanted that to be their final, and then they wrote a paper to reflect on the story itself. And so we took that learning and then brought it back into the next version of the class in spring 2015 and had students do the same. But however, that time, we had students go to West Virginia and North Carolina to also interview and help with that the narrative process in those states. We also had graduate students who, that's Becca, Shreya, and Garland were Appalachian Foodshed Project graduate students who were able to contribute to the editorial process with me and after the coursework. And then Becca herself, as a graduate student, did many, many interviews and worked across the region to reach out and to continue that process. So the short answer is yes. The long answer is this is how we did it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, we have another question from the chat box.
Okay.
Thank you so much from Liza Dobson. Thank you so much for hosting the session today. I have a question regarding the concept of holding space for folks to tell their stories. Could you explain a bit more about how you actually create that space, what steps are taken to ensure a safe, comfortable, open space, and what kinds of descriptors do you even use to start creating this space?
Well, hi, Liza. Those are excellent, excellent questions. There's probably a couple of ways to answer that. The immediate one I think of is, first, working in the communities that we are working in, these are relationships that we're building. And so it first comes from the interest from those relationships to create a story. And so one way to think about if people are interested in doing this work, it's, to me, not the act of going out and seeking people to tell their story. It's working with individuals and groups who are seeking opportunities to partner and link to tell the stories together. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is there's I think, a responsibility from, if you will, quote, I'll put on the researcher hat or the academic hat to think about this work not as an extractive experience. There's definitely that potential. I think that's a danger to asking people to give something and to not see that as more of a reciprocation, and being an active listener in that process is really important. I think we came into this with not having a specific agenda to what we're going to learn from it, other than we wanted to learn about the work and experience the work. And so we didn't write a grant to do this particular part of the project. This emerged from the practitioners, the activists, the farmers themselves wanting to share and connect. And so I may sound on a little bit of an open-ended note, but I think that's really not a place where we were, and not necessarily walking forward with a set of objectives that we had to fulfill to meet an obligation. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I think that opens up for some opportunity to think about why you do this and allowing the story be what it needs to be at that moment. And so the prompts were important to come from the practitioners themselves. They were given, so once we created that protocol, we were able to then continue asking our partnerships to, if they were interested in doing this, and it was always a yes. There was never, we feel like we have more work to be done because people are interested in continuing it. But so it's starting with the relationships first, showing in building prompts and story purpose together, and then utilizing that protocol and sharing that out. It was always shared ahead of time. People were able to modify things that they wanted to talk about and not talk about other things, encouraging them to be brave, encouraging them to share what is important to them. That's never been a problem, honestly. It's more about getting out of the way and letting the story be told. And I think also it was an opportunity to work with our graduate students to think about what that means to be an active listener and asking questions at a minimal level, not getting in the way of the story. which is also important in terms of the editing process, not to get in the way of what's being said, but allowing the editing to help the words jump off the page. So I hope I answered your question.
Can you also talk about the two-step IRB process?
Oh, yes, thank you. And very first, yes, thank you, Nikki. What we did for Internal Review Board, IRB, we first, in terms of, quote, the act of asking people, we just asked if they're willing to share their work. And again, we really kind of had a conversation around that. And we asked people, would they be willing? We had a consent form, and the consent form was asking them to participate in that 2-hour interview. This is what it means, et cetera, and what potential risks that are, of course, come from that, which were pretty minor. However, we then once we had the story, we edited that, then we brought that back to the storyteller and let them read it. It's their story. They read it. They were able to edit it, and for things that were sensitive to them, things that were meaningful to them, they were able to comment on both what was important to them and things that perhaps they preferred that were not shared in a public way. And then at that point, we had a second consent form that allowed for that story to be shared publicly with their name and the names in the story held in constant. So they were made public. So we do actually have several stories that the practitioner was not necessarily excited about sharing. We're using it as a learning tool internally to those who are working in the project from the academic side of things, which I think is very meaningful and very important. So we're honoring those who don't want that public face to that work, but we're willing and excited to share it. And we've actually had conversations with those individuals, and it's been very meaningful. And we're thankful for that generosity in itself. I hope that answers that question. It was really important to have two levels of consent and in application.
Are there any other questions? Oh, there's another question in the chat. Liza says, great, thank you. So
thanks, Liza.
Thanks for the question. Are there any other questions or comments? We've got a few more minutes. We can before we wrap things up.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Thanks. I think that the work of letting people tell their stories is really important and can be very empowering. And I've wondered, have you seen this project or this collection of stories contribute to forward movement or future projects or collaborations? Has there been networking benefits to it? How do you see it moving, I guess, material efforts forward within the progressive food movement?
No, it's a really, really good question. I would say yes in development, because we're just now getting, so there's two answers to the question. Yes, in that when the stories were created, they were part of the conversation about what the work was looking like. And so now we're able to have that immediate conversation so that knowing is made present right away. And so that really did help see connections, particularly as our Appalachian Foodshed Project, we're creating a very dynamic, quote, reporting process that we're hoping is launching to further work. So I think the narratives really fit nicely into that particular sense of knowing what people are doing and how they're doing that work. So I would answer yes to that. I think what's happening now that there's, to give you maybe a more immediate example, we just had a Southwest Virginia assessment team, Appalachian Virginia Food System Network meeting here recently, and while we didn't share narratives in that work, we had a reading and readings of work that was from our assessment process, which took on a similar approach. My point is we were able to share how people are doing their work. So you extrapolate that to people have told us, and we were told then, especially on Friday, there is a real strong interest in utilizing the storytelling process to continue that understanding. And so I think a lot of the food system change work that maybe you're referring to is able to be had a little bit more readily by our participants, because all of a sudden, like, well, yeah, I can connect to that, or I see that work being present in my life, or maybe I can challenge that. And so we're hearing that. I think a lot of our hope right now for the work is to continue with that process, to see more of that change. And I'll be the first to admit, I think this is part of a larger, more complex strategy. I think we have to do this work in companion with other ways to network and other ways to understand the system. So it's not a only way to do the work. It should be done, in my opinion. I think many of our colleagues would agree. It's one way to work with other ways of working, if that makes any sense. And so I think it's a valuable way to do that.
Cool. Thank you.
If I can just chime in too, I think one of the things that I think there are different ways to do storytelling, and one of the most useful pieces of our project, like, this is a really great project because it archives, it presents like a fairly, like, a digital platform for actually accessing stories, but there's also a need for creating spaces for people to interact, like our meeting on Friday, and exchange their stories and perspectives. And I think the more we can bring narratives and stories into this work, the broader the umbrella we can, for bringing more people into the food systems conversation and the food systems work, which increases their opportunities for innovation and really understanding a systems approach is, instead of just some of the more binary approaches that just look at economics only, or you know, kind of I think simplify what really needs to happen. So I think the narrative in this forum, and then in the spaces where people can tell stories one-on-one, are really just imperative to moving this work forward, whether it's here, very local, or multi-state, or in other places. So so this is a great example of a digital platform for doing the storytelling. So thank you for that question.
Yeah, thank you.
It's 11:59. I just want to close real quickly by thanking Kim for presenting today. And I also want to let everyone know we will be hosting another webinar at 1 p.m. Eastern Time on April 8th to share the results from the Virginia Community Food Security Assessment. There'll be some common themes across these two presentations, but I think it will be much more grounded in kind of the reality of our work here in Southwest Virginia. So please join us on April 8th at 1 p.m. in the same place. You can find more information on our website at www.appalachianfoodshedproject.org. You can get links to our Facebook page, our AFP blog, the narrative blog, as well as other resources coming out of the project. So thank you so much for joining us, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.
Thank you all.